This is the quiz review for AP US History 1, which will happen next Tuesday. So please meet in the Commons for this. This quiz will cover the presidency of Thomas Jefferson, including the following. When President Jefferson took office, he convinced, or tried to convince, Congress into making 5 changes in the federal government. What you need to know is which of those 5 changes requested by President Jefferson did Congress not accept. Secondly, you're going to have to know about the Supreme Court decision of Marbury versus Madison. I'm going to try to explain that again here so maybe you can get a better grasp for the quiz. After the Republicans swept the election of 1800, in which you had a Republican president, a Republican vice president, a Republican-controlled House, and a Republican-controlled Senate, the only power that the Federalist Party had in America were those federal judges that were originally appointed by virtue of the Judiciary Act of 1789. Now remember, the Judiciary Act of 1801 called for the appointment of 16 additional judges, and those were the judges that were appointed by Federalist President John Adams during the midnight appointments, all of those being Federalist. Well, that upset President Jefferson, and so he wanted to block these Federalist judges that were given their positions by virtue of the Judiciary Act of 1801 from taking office. So what he did is he ordered his Secretary of State, James Madison, not to deliver the commissions or the orders granting power to those 16 federal judges. By not delivering those commissions, they would not have the power to be judges, and really Jefferson thought that would be the end of it. Well, one of those Federalist judges, those 16 that were appointed by the Judiciary Act of 1801 and President Adams, decided to sue the federal government for his commission. Well, that suit went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in 1803, the Supreme Court ruled on Marbury versus Madison. And Chief Justice John Marshall in the Supreme Court made basically 2 rulings. The first ruling they made was that Marbury had total right to his commission according to the Judiciary Act of 1789, which set up our federal judicial system. However, the second part of Marshall's ruling was that the Judiciary Act of 1789 was unconstitutional. Thus, Marbury would not get his appointment. Now, this upset the Federalist Party, obviously, because those justices would have been Federalists. And even though Marshall was a Federalist himself, he sacrificed what he considered a small Federalist gain for a much larger long-term judicial victory. And what really Marshall did by ruling this act of Congress unconstitutional, the Judiciary Act of 1789, is he established what we know as the doctrine of judicial review. And from this point on, the Supreme Court would exercise the power to decide whether an act of Congress, either the House or the Senate, was allowed by the Constitution. In other words, they would rule if a law passed by Congress was constitutional or unconstitutional. So the Supreme Court now could overrule actions of those 2 branches of Congress. This is an important Supreme Court decision because it allows someone to make sure that Congress passes laws that follow the Constitution. And that someone that's going to make sure of that is the United States Supreme Court. So hopefully that clears up Marbury versus Madison. Some other things you need to know. You need to know who Samuel Chase was. Okay? You also need to know who Rufus King was, and also George Clinton. Moving on, you need to know the reason why Aaron Burr challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel. And I'll kind of go through this with you. Aaron Burr decided not to run for the vice presidency in 1804 with President Jefferson because he was going to campaign to be governor of New York. Well, Alexander Hamilton did not like Aaron Burr and he did not trust Aaron Burr. So he urged not only fellow Federalists to vote against Burr for the governorship of New York, but basically anybody would listen to him on either side. Well, Burr eventually loses the election and he blames Alexander Hamilton for his defeat. Well, it goes even farther because Burr gets rumor that Hamilton made an uncomplimentary remark about him during the campaign when he ran for governor of New York, and Burr demanded an apology from Alexander Hamilton. Well, when Hamilton refused to apologize, Burr challenged him to the duel. That's how that came about. Make sure you know they did meet the morning of July 11th, 1804. They both took their paces and turned to fire. Burr fired, Hamilton chose not to, and Hamilton lost his life. The reason why Hamilton chose not to fire is Alexander Hamilton had lost his own son to a duel several years back in the exact same spot where this duel with Aaron Burr commenced. And so Hamilton chose pride and commitment to his values over his own life. Another thing we'd like you to know is what the orders in council were, what freedom of the seas means, and also we want you to know concerning the Embargo Act of 1807, what three specific groups of Americans were upset about the Embargo Act of 1807 and why. Again, this quiz will be worth 50 points and will be Tuesday of next week in the Commons. If you have any questions, give me a text.